The ambient temperature inside the heritage barn was exactly 72 degrees Fahrenheit, but the digital display on my thermal imaging camera showed a localized heat signature of 140 degrees radiating from the main electrical panel on the north wall. I lowered the FLIR camera, letting it hang heavily from its thick yellow lanyard against my gray departmental t-shirt. I unclipped my metal clipboard, the sharp snap echoing in the cavernous space. The smell of dry alfalfa, aged oak timber, and the faint, acrid scent of ozone hung heavy in the stagnant air. This entire structure was a textbook Class A combustible hazard. It was a disaster waiting for a single spark. I turned my attention to the young festival volunteer who was standing nervously beside a towering stack of hay bales. He couldn't have been older than 20, wearing a bright orange staff lanyard that looked brand new. The issue isn't just the daisy-chained extension cords running across a high-traffic dirt floor, I began, pointing the blunt, brass end of my pen at the far wall, where the wires snaked behind a wooden partition. Section 400.8 of the National Electrical Code explicitly prohibits the use of flexible cords as a substitute for the fixed wiring of a structure. You currently have a 14-gauge wire attempting to pull 20 amps to power those commercial halogen work lights. The resistance is creating severe thermal degradation in the copper sheathing. Give this system another 48 hours of continuous load, and the resulting electrical arc will ignite the particulate matter suspended in the air. The ignition temperature of hay dust is, Captain Bailey. The voice was steady, resonant, and cut right through the middle of my safety lecture. I turned. Veronica Ortiz stood at the end of the center aisle. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the high, grimy clerestory windows, catching the wide brim of her brown cowboy hat and highlighting the long, dark brown hair that fell loosely over her shoulders. She wore a blue plaid shirt left unbuttoned over a simple white tank top, the fabric visibly dusted with fine sawdust from the carpentry booths being built outside. Her warm brown eyes were currently narrowed in distinct, unfiltered frustration. She closed the distance between us, her worn leather boots making absolutely no sound on the packed dirt floor. She didn't glance at the terrified volunteer. She looked directly at the thermal camera resting against my chest, analyzing the threat I represented to her timeline. She leaned closer, lowering her voice so it wouldn't carry over the hum of the portable ventilation fans. Come to the tack room, not in front of the volunteers. I adjusted my grip on the aluminum clipboard, feeling the cold metal against my palm. The specific location of the electrical violation is highly relevant to the documentation process. The municipal code requires. She didn't wait for the rest of the citation. She simply turned on her heel and walked away, fully expecting me to follow. I let out a measured breath through my nose, cataloging the sudden spike in my own frustration, and fell into step behind her. We bypassed the main livestock pens, navigating past a massive Holstein cow that was chewing cud quietly in its stall, and entered a small, enclosed space at the back of the barn. It smelled of old leather saddles and hoof oil. The moment the heavy, iron-hinged wooden door clicked shut, the chaotic noise of the fairgrounds vanished, leaving us in a tense, echoing silence. "You're terrifying my staff," Veronica said, turning to face me. She crossed her arms tightly, pulling the blue plaid fabric taut across her shoulders. "I am informing them of objective, quantifiable hazards," I corrected, maintaining a flat, professional tone. Fear is simply a secondary emotional response to a lack of preparation. If your staff understood the thermal cascade failure of, "Ethan, stop." She pinched the bridge of her nose, her eyes squeezing shut for a fraction of a second. "The Grand Jubilee is exactly 6 weeks away. If this festival doesn't open on time, the local agricultural board is going to declare insolvency. They already have commercial developers waiting with cash offers to buy this land, pave over the heritage plots, and build a strip mall. I know the wiring in this barn is ancient. I have a licensed commercial electrician booked and paid for the first of the month. The first of the month is mathematically unacceptable," I stated, pulling a pen from my pocket. "The current setup violates 3 separate municipal fire codes. The physical risk to human life does not pause for your scheduling conflicts. I am required by law to red tag this building today." Before she could process the weight of the closure, the heavy wooden door of the tack room swung open, scraping loudly against the uneven floorboards. Inspector Solomon Price stood in the doorway, a pristine plastic clipboard tucked neatly under his arm. Price was a senior official from the city's Central Building Authority. He wore a crisp white shirt and a tie that looked completely out of place in a barn. Price wasn't here to protect anyone. He was a known rubber stamp for the agricultural board's more lucrative ambitions. He wanted the Jubilee shut down because a canceled festival would make it infinitely easier for the board to justify selling the land to the developers. If he could force one legitimate, documented closure notice onto Veronica's record, he'd hand those developers exactly what they needed. "Well, this is incredibly convenient," Price said, his voice a slow, satisfied drawl. He stepped into the room, his polished shoes crunching on a stray piece of hay. "I was just about to have my office draft the formal closure notice for the northern sector. Good to see the fire department is already on the exact same page." Veronica's posture went completely rigid. She dropped her arms to her sides, her fists clenching slightly. "Inspector Price, as I told your office yesterday, we have a bonded electrician booked for the 1st of the month. The agricultural pavilion has a historical exemption." "Actually," I interjected, taking a half step forward to physically block Price's direct line of sight to Veronica. "The historical exemption, as detailed in Municipal Statute 11B, applies strictly to structural load-bearing modifications. It does not grandfather in hazardous electrical loads that present an immediate life safety threat. Therefore, her argument is technically invalid." Price smirked, ready to write the citation. Veronica shot me a look of pure betrayal. "However," I continued, my voice raising in volume just enough to command the small room, "under the Fire Marshal's discretionary protocol, Section 104.2, a temporary use permit can be granted if a strict mitigation plan is implemented and directly supervised by a qualified fire official within a 48-hour window." Price's smirk vanished, his brows pulled together in a sharp line. "I didn't approve any mitigation plan, Captain Bailey." "You don't have to," I stated calmly, staring him down. "The fire chief has jurisdictional override on temporary hazard mitigation. As a ranking captain, I am officially logging this site as an active departmental oversight project. The Heritage Barn stays open, provided the immediate electrical faults are corrected by Monday morning." Price's jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. He tapped his pen aggressively against his plastic clipboard. He knew the code as well as I did. He knew he couldn't override a fire captain on an active fire safety mitigation. "Fine," Price spat, taking a step back toward the door. "Monday morning, Captain. If I find a single frayed wire, a single tripped breaker, I'm shutting down the entire festival. Not just this barn, the whole perimeter." He turned and walked out, slamming the heavy door behind him. The tack room descended back into silence. Dust motes danced in the single beam of sunlight cutting through the small window. "You just bought us 48 hours, Veronica said, her voice lacking its previous sharp edge. She sounded exhausted. "I bought us exactly 46 hours and 15 minutes given the current time," I noted, checking the face of my tactical watch. "And us implies a joint operational effort. I am going to need access to your main breaker panel, a heavy-duty lockout-tagout kit, and written authorization from you as the site director to sever the non-compliant lines." Veronica looked at me, a complex expression crossing her features. The anger was gone, replaced by a cautious, calculating scrutiny. "You're actually going to help fix it? Why?" "Because," I said, looking away from her to inspect a rusted hinge on the wall, "a strip mall does not require a heritage barn, and I strongly dislike Inspector Price's methodology. I will be here at 0600 hours tomorrow." The next morning, the dense, gray fog was still burning off the tall grass when I parked my department truck near the rear gates. The air was biting cold. I carried my heavy canvas tool bag into the Heritage Barn. The massive space was eerily quiet without the volunteers. Veronica was already there. She was sitting on a hay bale near the center aisle, a thick clipboard resting on her knees, reviewing vendor liability contracts under the glow of a battery-powered lantern. The white tank top and blue plaid shirt were the same as yesterday, but she had tied her dark hair back into a practical, messy knot. The overhead halogen lights flickered briefly, casting long, erratic shadows across the dirt floor, before settling back into a dull hum. "City grid voltage drop," I observed, setting my canvas bag heavily onto a wooden workbench. I noticed it when I pulled in. The municipal utility pole outside the culinary pavilion has a compromised weather seal. It's been sparking since the heavy rainstorm last Tuesday, but Public Works keeps ignoring the standard maintenance work orders. "We'll run this barn on completely isolated circuits today to protect your sensitive equipment from the fluctuations." "Good morning to you too, Ethan," she said, offering a tired half smile. She closed her folder and walked over to the panel. Tell me what to do. I snapped a red plastic lockout tag onto the main breaker, securing it with a small padlock. I threw the heavy steel switch, killing the remaining power to the barn. We were left in the dim, natural light filtering through the high windows. I opened the gray metal panel box, confronting a labyrinth of spliced wires and bypassed ceramic fuses. I isolated the primary circuits, clipping away the blackened sheathing and securing the lines into code-compliant junction boxes. The heavy mechanical snaps of my pliers echoed in the quiet space. Veronica didn't retreat to her office. She stood nearby, watching my hands, occasionally passing me a roll of electrical tape or a specific screwdriver when I pointed to it. At one point, I needed to run a new line of protective steel conduit along the upper support structure. I climbed a 6-foot aluminum stepladder, balancing a heavy metal conduit bracket against a particularly stubborn, uneven oak beam. I pressed my cordless drill against the metal, pulling the trigger. The drill bit screamed against the wood, then violently slipped sideways, nearly taking a chunk out of my knuckle. The density of old-growth oak? I muttered, highly frustrated, adjusting my grip on the drill. It causes the high-speed bit to walk if you don't pre-drill a pilot hole with a masonry bit first. The friction coefficient of this specific timber. Ethan. Her voice was soft, barely carrying over the sound of the distant highway. I stopped. I looked down at her from the top of the stepladder. She was looking up at me, her brown eyes completely clear of the stress that usually clouded them. You don't have to explain the physics of the wood to me, she said gently. Just tell me what you need. The explanation about the specific gravity of aged timber rose to my tongue out of pure habit. It was my default setting. When the world was chaotic, I retreated to data. I bit it back hard enough to taste a faint metallic tang of copper in my mouth. I forced my jaw to relax, lowered the heavy drill to my side, and met her eyes instead. I need you to hold the bracket steady against the beam while I tap the pilot hole, I said quietly, the words feeling strangely vulnerable without a barrage of facts to hide behind. She didn't hesitate. She climbed up the first 2 steps of the aluminum ladder, bringing her face level with my chest. She reached up, her bare hands pressing firmly against the cold metal bracket, locking it into place against the wood. I positioned the drill. My arms naturally bracketed her shoulders to reach the correct angle, my forearms hovering inches from her plaid shirt without making physical contact. I could smell the distinct, sharp scent of vanilla mixed with the sawdust on her clothes. Hold it exactly there, I instructed, keeping my voice low. I pulled the trigger. The drill bit bit into the wood perfectly, the sound echoing loudly in the empty barn. When I finished driving the heavy lag screw, she stepped down, dusting off her hands on her jeans. We had neutralized the primary electrical hazard. Over the next few weeks, the friction of our initial meeting shifted into a strange, highly structured routine. My official shifts at the downtown firehouse ended at 1,800 hours. By 1830, my white department truck was parked at the fairgrounds. The temporary fix in the Heritage Barn had easily passed Price's Monday morning inspection, much to his visible annoyance, but the entire massive festival infrastructure needed constant, vigilant monitoring to stay one step ahead of the city inspectors who were looking for any excuse to issue a new citation. The domestic anchors of our routine became predictable, a quiet rhythm beneath the chaos of the festival build. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the tree line and the temperature dropped, the smell of damp earth and the sweet, buttery scent of kettle corn from the early vendor tests began to permeate the grounds. At exactly 1,900 hours, regardless of which pavilion I was inspecting, Veronica would find me. We were sitting on the dropped tailgate of my department truck, parked in the shadows behind the towering main stage. She reached into her canvas tote bag and pulled out a battered, dented green thermos. She unscrewed the metal cup and poured a steaming measure of black coffee, handing it to me before I even had to ask. Your caffeine intake is statistically abnormal for someone of your body mass index, I noted, accepting the warm metal cup. The heat seeped comfortably into my cold fingers. It's survival fluid, she countered, pouring a smaller amount into the plastic lid for herself. She leaned back against the side of the truck bed, staring up at the massive aluminum rigging being hoisted for the stage lights. The stress lines around her eyes were deeper tonight. My last job, she started, her voice quieter than usual, was managing a massive, high-end corporate event space in the city. I was good at it. Rediget event fam, nomer fam, we was no majemaded. But I missed one critical permitting deadline for a tech conference. Just one piece of paperwork lost in the shuffle. The fire marshal shut the event down 3 hours before doors opened. The company lost millions in revenue. The investors pulled out, and I was publicly fired. She turned the plastic cup slowly in her hands, watching the dark liquid swirl. This festival, it's not just a job to me, Ethan. It's my proof that I'm not a failure. If Inspector Price shuts us down, the Agricultural Board will sell the land to those developers on Monday morning, and I'll be exactly who they said I was. Incompetent. My eyes stayed on the fine tremor in her hand as she gripped the thermos, then shifted to the thick leather-bound permit folder beside her, worn completely soft at the edges from being opened in a panic too many times. I didn't need her to supply more data. I reached over and set my empty metal cup onto the ribbed surface of the truck bed. The aluminum truss rigging on that stage is officially rated for 3 times the dynamic weight load they currently have hanging on it, I said, pointing up into the darkness. The wiring in the Heritage Barn is now fully, legally compliant. Your food vendors have met all secondary egress requirements. The data does not support a failure here. Veronica, you have built a mathematically sound infrastructure. A small, dry smile touched the corners of her lips. She looked over at me, the tension easing just a fraction in her shoulders. Was that an emotional reassurance wrapped in an engineering report, Captain? It was an objective assessment of reality based on field observations, I replied, keeping my expression entirely serious, though I couldn't entirely suppress the warmth blooming in my chest. She let out a short, genuine laugh, the sound breaking the heavy tension in the evening air. The silence that followed stretched between us, comfortable and steady, anchored by the smell of the coffee and the quiet hum of the fairgrounds preparing for the night. The midpoint twist occurred exactly 1 week before the Grand Jubilee was scheduled to open its gates to the public. I was sitting in the temporary command center trailer, logging my daily compliance reports into the department database, when a sharp, concussive crack echoed across the fairgrounds. It sounded like a cannon shot. It was followed instantly by the complete, catastrophic loss of power in the entire southern sector of the festival. The hum of the generators died. The lights went black. I grabbed my heavy department radio off the charger and bolted out the trailer door. The acrid, unmistakable smell of burning industrial insulation hit the night air almost immediately. I ran toward the culinary pavilion. Thick, black smoke was billowing from the rear utility alley, illuminated by the flashing yellow lights of a confused security cart. When I arrived, a small crowd of vendors had already gathered, shouting in panic. Veronica was at the front, trying to push people back with her arms extended. "Stand back, clear the alley," I ordered, my voice cutting through the panic with the trained volume of a fire captain. I moved past her, unholstering my thermal camera. The screen flared a blinding, dangerous white near the top of the city-owned utility pole behind the pavilion. The massive municipal transformer, the exact one I had noted sparking weeks ago, had blown completely. Within 10 minutes, my engine company arrived and secured the scene with caution tape and dry chemical extinguishers. There was no active spreading fire, just the catastrophic smoking ruin of the transformer. But the damage to the festival's timeline was immediate and devastating. Inspector Price arrived 30 minutes later, stepping out of a black city sedan. He didn't look up at the charred transformer on the pole. He didn't ask about injuries. He walked straight past the fire crews and looked directly at the festival's heavy power distribution boxes sitting on the ground. "That's it," Price announced loudly, ensuring the nearby vendors and the arriving local press could hear him clearly. "I'm issuing a full, immediate stop work order. Your festival's unregulated, illegal power draw just overloaded the city grid and destroyed municipal property. The entire fairground is shut down pending a full safety investigation." "That's impossible," Veronica protested, her voice tight with rising panic. She stepped toward him, holding up her clipboard. "We mapped the load limits with a master electrician. We were operating at 60% capacity. We didn't overload anything. Tell that to the blown transformer, Miss Ortiz." Price sneered, pulling a formal, pink, carbon copy shutdown notice from his clipboard and shoving it against her chest. "No one sets foot on this property until my office clears it, which, given the extent of this damage, won't be before your opening day. The Jubilee is canceled." He turned and walked away, the gravel crunching under his polished shoes. Veronica took the paper. Her shoulders sank. The fight seemed to completely drain out of her. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. A municipal transformer does not spontaneously combust without a root mechanical cause, I said, keeping my voice low and completely steady. If the electrical fault didn't originate from your distribution equipment, and I know it didn't, it originated from the city's hardware. How are you going to prove that? She asked, looking up at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears of frustration. Price is the lead investigator for the building authority. He writes the final report. He's going to hand this to the board tomorrow. He is a bureaucrat. I corrected, my tone hardening into absolute professional certainty. I am an arson investigator. Physics leaves a trail that politics cannot erase. Meet me at the municipal building tomorrow at 0800 hours for the emergency board hearing. Bring all your physical maintenance logs. I didn't waste time arguing with Price in the dirt. I left the fairgrounds and drove straight to the downtown fire station. It was 2,300 hours. I walked into the chief's office. I laid out the thermal images, the load calculations, and the obvious political motive. My captain signed the emergency interagency access request before his shift ended, giving me the legal clearance to bypass Price's office, pull the municipal maintenance archives, and utilize the county forensics lab. I spent the next 9 hours locked in a windowless room. I mapped the exact sequence of electrical failure. I pulled every maintenance request filed for that specific utility sector over the last 5 years. I drank 4 cups of terrible breakroom coffee. At 0500 hours, I found the exact piece of paper I needed. Friday morning. The municipal committee room was cold, lit by harsh fluorescent lights. It was filled with city council members, the entire agricultural board, and Inspector Price, who sat at the head table looking entirely too comfortable, sipping water from a glass. Veronica sat beside me at the presenter's table. She wore a sharp, professional black blazer over her white shirt, her posture perfect, refusing to show defeat. Price opened the hearing. He spent 20 minutes detailing the reckless, amateur power management of the festival. He laid out a terrifying, exaggerated narrative of public endangerment, formally urging the board to revoke the festival permit permanently and proceed immediately with the lucrative land sale to the commercial developers. The committee chairman, a tired-looking man with silver hair, adjusted his glasses and looked down at us. Miss Ortiz, the city's preliminary report is highly damning. Do you have a response? Veronica stood up. She didn't look at Price. She looked directly at the chairman. The festival operated strictly within the approved, documented power parameters at all times. I yield the remainder of my time to Captain Bailey of the fire department. She sat down. I stood up. I didn't bring a notepad or a plea for leniency. I brought a secure hard drive and a single, heavy, black, 3-ring binder. I connected the drive to the room's projector system. Inspector Price claims the festival caused a massive upstream power overload, I began, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room over the low hum of the projector fan. I clicked a button. A high-resolution, macro lens image of the charred transformer internals filled the massive screen behind me. However, basic electrical physics dictates that a load-based overload generates uniform thermal degradation across the entire copper coil. This image shows localized, catastrophic arcing exclusively at the grounding lug. That specific type of failure is not caused by power draw. It is caused by water ingress due to a compromised weather seal. Price scoffed loudly, leaning back in his leather chair. A cracked rubber seal doesn't absolve them from overloading the system, Captain. It's a technicality. It is not a technicality, I countered immediately, flipping open the heavy black binder. It is the entire root cause. Because the compromised seal was a known, documented municipal issue. I pulled a stamped, yellowed piece of paper from the sleeve and held it up. This is a maintenance request filed by Miss Ortiz 4 months ago, noting heavy, visible, sparking from that exact pole during a rainstorm. The city dispatched an inspector to evaluate the hazard. I turned the page, pulling out a second document. This is the official sign-off sheet from that inspection. The inspector noted the seal was compromised and allowing moisture inside. But, rather than ordering a costly replacement of the unit, the inspector bypassed the secondary safety breaker inside the housing to prevent nuisance tripping during storms. I looked directly across the room, locking eyes with Price. The signature on the bypass authorization. The order that disabled the safety mechanism and guaranteed a catastrophic failure under a normal, legal load belongs to you, Inspector Price. The room went dead silent. Price's face lost all its color, turning a sickly shade of gray. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. When the festival drew a standard, legally permitted load, I stated, my tone merciless. The compromised, ungrounded transformer failed exactly as physics dictates it would. The fault, and the liability for the destruction of municipal property, belongs entirely to your office. The committee chairman snatched the copies of the documents from his assistant, his eyes scanning Price's signature. He looked up, his expression furious. Inspector Price, is this your signature? Price stammered. He offered a vague, crumbling excuse about municipal budget constraints and standard practices, but the trap was sprung. The mechanism of his leverage was utterly destroyed by his own paperwork. The chairman struck his heavy wooden gavel. The stop work order is rescinded immediately. Miss Ortiz, your festival is cleared to open on schedule. Inspector Price, I need to see you in my office. Now. We walked out of the sterile municipal building into the bright, blinding morning sunlight. The air felt incredibly light. The oppressive, suffocating weight of the past 6 weeks was gone. I unlocked my department truck and pulled a rolled-up, heavy cardboard architectural tube from the back seat. I slid the tube across the warm hood of my truck toward Veronica. The fire marshal's embossed gold seal caught the morning light, pressing flat against the metal. The finalized occupancy permit for the Heritage Barn. You are fully, legally compliant. No one can shut you down. Veronica took the tube. She looked up at me, her brown eyes bright and steady. She didn't launch into a speech. She didn't say thank you. She simply unzipped her canvas tote bag, pulled out her battered green thermos, and poured a steaming cup of black coffee. She slid it across the hood of the truck to sit right next to the permit. A perfect, silent acknowledgement of the routine that had kept us anchored. Opening night of the Grand Jubilee was a chaotic, beautiful symphony of lights, music, and thousands of people crowding the fairgrounds. I stood near the perimeter fencing of the main stage, wearing my formal Class A dress uniform. I was officially on duty, monitoring the crowd density, but my focus was entirely on the stage. Veronica stood at the microphone, looking out over the massive crowd. Before we officially opened the Jubilee, her voice boomed over the towering speaker system. I need to acknowledge that this event almost didn't happen. It takes a village to build something like this, but it takes someone truly dedicated to protect a community when things go wrong. She looked out over the sea of faces, her eyes finding me instantly by the fencing. She didn't point, but her focus was unwavering. I want to introduce you to the man who fought for this festival, who proved with facts and dedication that this fairground is worth saving. My partner in all this chaos, Captain Ethan Bailey. The crowd erupted into massive applause. I felt the heat rise in the back of my neck. It was a public acknowledgement, a definitive, concrete choice. She was claiming our alliance in front of thousands of people. I gave her a sharp, respectful salute. She smiled brilliantly, stepping back from the microphone as the band began to play. An hour later, I found her standing near the entrance to the Heritage Barn. The intumescent treated cornstalks looked perfect. The decorative lights were glowing safely, casting a warm light over the crowds moving through the exhibits. The Agricultural Board held an emergency vote this afternoon after the hearing, she said, stopping next to me. The noise of the festival washed over us. Because the festival opened today without a single safety violation, and because Price was removed, they secured the state heritage grant. The land sale to the developers is officially canceled. The infrastructure is stable, I confirmed, looking at the barn. With proper maintenance, this site will operate safely and indefinitely. She turned to face me fully. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out a heavy, antique brass key on a simple metal ring. The board also approved the budget for next year's Jubilee, she said quietly, holding the key out between us. I'm putting together a permanent planning committee. I need a safety director, someone who isn't afraid to tell me exactly why my decorative netting is a massive fire hazard. She held the key steady. It wasn't a grand, sweeping romantic declaration. It was a practical necessity. It was a shared access point to the physical future she was building, and she was asking me to build it with her. I didn't hesitate. I didn't calculate the variables. I reached out and took the key, my fingers brushing against hers. The cool, solid metal felt perfectly real and perfectly safe in the palm of my hand. The end. Closing thoughts? The brass key sat cool and heavy in my palm while the warm festival lights held steady against the night sky behind us. For the first time in 6 weeks, I looked at the structure we had defended and knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing was going to fail. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.